Hello, today I am joined with my mom, and she's going to be talking about her journey and her visions and also what she thought her calling was. So, the first question I'm going to start off with is, when did you first know that what you do now is what you really wanted to do?
Well, I would say that I definitely always wanted to be a mom. I wasn't sure growing up how exactly that would look and, how I would have a family and, a lot of the details. But I remember when I was getting my graduate degree and I was working with a consulting firm and I was getting interviewed at a lunch about what I wanted to do, and I really did feel in my heart all of the different things that were options. I really felt like first and foremost I wanted to be a mother, and then when I married Joe, I realized that with his travel schedule and work schedule I was definitely going to need to be focused on that home because he was gone at that point. He worked out of town 4 to 5 days a week. And so, we had 2 kids who were 19 and a half months apart. So it became really clear that someone was going to need to be home. And I was not as far along in my career as he was. So it was a logistical question, but in my heart of hearts, it was definitely what I wanted. And so it was an easy choice for me to make from that sense.
That's great. The next question is, what do you like and dislike about your work?
I think what I like and dislike about my work are actually go hand in hand. I think what I like about my work is that no 2 days are the same. And then sometimes what I've disliked about my work is that no 2 days are the same. And I think it can be really challenging because especially when the kids were really young and really active, like I did not know what each day would look like. And I'm a pretty scheduled person and I like certainty, and I really had to stretch myself personally and emotionally to become more flexible because at any moment there could be a need that arose that I could never have foreseen, like someone getting sick or hurt or needing to go somewhere or wanting to help a friend out or whatever it could be. So I really learned to grow as a person and become more flexible because I felt like the job required it. And I really did want there to be fluidity and like happiness in the house, that we could go with the flow and really be able to manage through whatever ups and downs there were. So I would say that that's something that's been great, is because I'm not bored. But then it's also been a challenge because I have had to become a more flexible person, which I think I have, and I think it's made me a better person for sure.
Okay. So, do you have any some stories that stand out to you that maybe your favorites from your career and your work life?
Sure. I would say that for me, my favorite stories have been sort of our travel stories. I would say that I really have enjoyed traveling as a family, and I mean even like just locally, like going to the zoo and going to the aquarium and going swimming and exploring, going to Brook Run Park, and just being a family, going on walks. I would say that my favorite stories have always sort of accounted for some of our adventures, and I have funny stories from when we would actually travel and do fun things, like the time that like you guys got on the elevator at the hotel in Vancouver, and I couldn't believe that you were going on the elevator without us. And so there were a few of those mishaps. Thankfully you were all safe, but I think about traveling and sort of the little adventures that we had along the way. I would say like my favorite stories are just kind of around those traveling things, and then also just our rituals. Like I've really enjoyed the way we spend holidays and the different things that we will do at each time. Like, at Christmas we go to the botanical gardens, and we've seen Santa, and we've seen friends, and I love those things that mark time, right? Those precious moments that mark time. And that's when you really step back and absorb sort of the progress and the process that you've been as a person who's devoted themselves to their profession or, basically their calling, but it's also seeing everyone else develop. So I would say that my favorite stories have been around traveling and experiences, and then also like our rituals that we have related to holidays.
Great. What do you think? What did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. So I was always a really ambitious kid, and I loved school. And I really love school still. I love learning. I've gone back to school. I have a master's, and I also have another certificate from another school in a completely different subject. So I've always enjoyed schooling, and I kind of, in a lot of ways, always related a lot to my dad, and my dad was in business. So when I started out, I really wanted to do something in business. I just thought that was really fun, and he would take me to the office. Even when he worked in New York City, I would go into the office with him, which was really very cool. And I always felt like very much a part of things. So growing up, I definitely worked hard to make sure that was an option. But I also realized quickly that was going to be really hard for me to have the family life that I really wanted as well. And so I made like a conscious set of trade-offs with, despite my education, I said, you know what, I'm going to use that in ways that maybe are less traditional, like in working with my family, in volunteering, being part of a number of organizations, and sharing, whatever gifts and talents that I hopefully have, but sharing those with, people in maybe a different, less traditional way. So I would say that how I have become as a person is not necessarily what I envisioned, but in a lot of ways suits me much better than what I would have, originally thought.
Okay. Did you learn from any big mistakes, or as someone called wrong turns, that end up making you better, and now looking back at what you experienced would make you consider them as helpful mistakes?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, I think something that was a very helpful wrong turn for me was actually going into business and consulting, because I realized very quickly it was a very harsh environment, and I actually felt very overwhelmed by it, and I did not enjoy that, and it forced me to really look at what I thought I wanted to do versus what I thought I should do. And I think that ultimately I ended up leaving that and going into a think tank environment, which was a much more relaxed nonprofit environment. And I think that suited me really well. And so I think the wrong turns I made early on helped me sort of hone in on what I wanted to do, and also made me realize that there were other ways I could contribute. It's like the Mother Teresa about, if you like to change the world, go home and love your family. Like, I felt like very much called in that direction, especially given how busy my partner was. So I think my wrong turn in my career actually helped me solidify my actual calling.
I like that a lot. Did you, or do you still have someone that you look at as a mentor, or as a main inspiration for where you are now?
So a mentor for me as a mom would definitely be our old neighbor, Terry. She always had a lot of fun with her kids. They always had adventures, and she was really devoted to them, and they were a really tight-knit family. She also was home with the kids because her husband was, he's a lawyer, and he was gone like all day, every day with that. And so she actually really had a lot of joy in being a parent, and felt very honored and blessed to be an at-home mom. And in a lot of ways, I think that inspired me to just embrace this and really make a lot of fun out of it, with like holidays and meals and having friends over, and kind of all the joy of being with the family. So I would definitely say she's been my mentor in a lot of ways.
For me, as I'm growing up and figuring out what my calling is, do you have any advice or recommendations that I should take along my path?
Yeah, I would definitely say listen to your heart and do what you want to do and what you think you want to do, not what others think you should do. Another reason why I went into consulting is I had to take some student loans, and I got very concerned about paying those off. And I think in a lot of ways, I was very fixated on that. And it forced me in a situation where I didn't choose a profession that really suited me. I kind of did it for the fact that I'd have a solid income and be able to pay those loans off. And in a lot of ways, I think following your passion, I believe strongly that if you follow your passion, the money can come. Or if the money doesn't come, then you're going to find the joy in the ways that you now interact in your community or within your own family unit. So I definitely think it's important to find a passion. I don't think I did that early enough along in the professional environment, but as a parent, I have found that passion for sure. And I enjoy being a parent, but I also really enjoy what we do as a family, and I enjoy our friends.
If you had a do-over, what would you do differently?
I would say that one thing that was really hard was the fact that we moved down to Atlanta right before we had kids, and we had kids pretty quickly after we were married, and we didn't really take a lot of time to think about where we were living, and we ended up buying a house pretty quickly. I would definitely say that I wish we had rented first and maybe had looked around at neighborhoods before we went ahead and bought, because I think that we might have made a more informed choice. I do think God was in that whole process though, because that's actually how we met Terry, our neighbor, who ended up being a mentor. So I think it was all meant to be. But I think if I were to give advice to someone, I would say that if you're moving to a new town, I would take your time finding a place, consider renting if it's inconvenient, and really looking around. The other thing I would say is that it was hard to leave DC because Joe and I were living in Washington, DC. And I think that what we could have done was potentially stayed up there a little bit longer and then come down here. And then that way we would have probably enjoyed the city maybe a little bit longer while we were still like newly married. But I think, again, I don't really look back on those things with a lot of thought, because I do think that God has a hand in all the decisions that we make. But I would definitely say just taking your time to make those decisions, because I think where you establish yourself as a person is actually really important, and the community you surround yourself with is important. So making the most informed choice is really important when you're kind of developing into adulthood.
How do you stay calm and centered when you have a hard and busy day?
I would say starting the day off right is really important. I think I've learned the importance of sleep. I think making sure to get enough rest is a huge benefit. So I would say starting the day with a good amount of sleep on the belt, a somewhat, some healthy food or a breakfast that, helps get things going on the right foot is also really important. I think if there's time to exercise, a time to do it is also great in the morning so that you start the day centered. So I do believe in those things. And I think amidst the busyness and chaos, I think it's just taking that deep breath and I think like Mr. Ficus, who was a teacher at Marist, taught a lot about being, in the moment and being present and being willing to take the deep breath and have a meditative, intentional moment, even when you're doing simple things like driving a car or washing dishes. It's just sort of thinking and calming your mind while you're doing simple tasks can kind of keep you centered throughout, so that when things go from 0 to 60, you're actually ready to go because you've been operating at a good pace. I think the hard part is if you're always at 100 miles an hour and all of a sudden you have to reach 120, you're overwhelmed. So I think learning to be at that 80% and staying in that space is really important, because then when you do have to bump it up with either busyness or things going on or unexpected twists and turns, you have the energy for it, and you also can center yourself quickly. So I think the important thing is not to be overwhelmed constantly, because then you're going to not be able to handle things when you actually really need to.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of self-care, I guess.
Yeah. How has your faith life grown or changed while in this role?
Yeah, so I think it's actually grown or changed a lot. I think obviously just over the almost 20 years, I've grown and changed as a person. I've matured. Our family's hit some bumps in the road at times. I mean, I think Joe's cancer 6 years ago was a rubber meets the road kind of moment where really have to just bear down and keep your eyes up and focused on God, and just, not let yourself get dragged into some of the rabbit hole of negative thinking. So I think that's something I really had to adapt. I know for me, like, I did the Spirit of Mary, three-part sessions in a small group setting a couple of years ago. It was before COVID. It was like 2019. And that was a real enrichment of my spiritual life. I also was an adoration guardian for almost 2 years. And that was a big enrichment of my spiritual life. And then also just being involved in community service. I think that prayer and service are the most important components. And thankfully, I've had some time to do those things. And even just, cooking for the men's shelter at OLA, I think I feel, a connection even deeper to our community. So I think it's taking the time to invest in that, and then trying as a family to keep our mass, our weekly ritual, and also our time together, like eating meals and making sure we say our blessing every time we sit down together, and talking about the things that we're grateful for and living our life with gratitude. And I think, when you get into a moment where you're not sure if things are ever going to be the same, like we did, 6 years ago with Joe, you kind of realize that every moment is a blessing, and just to be in those moments, and also not be afraid to also plan for continued moments, because we only have this one life. And I think that my faith has deepened, grown, and changed for the better.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I love you.
Love you.